I had no interest in radio, although I've done some minor stuff in radio, but I had no interest in that except as possibly as a paying job. But none of that ever eventuated in New York. But I was very interested in working on the stage, but I also was very interested in working in films. And at that time, we didn't even consider television as being a viable option. It was in its infancy, and I was expecting to do great films at MGM, and I did do some great films in very, very small parts. I was there for a year, and they dropped my option after a year. I guess they figured I was not going anywhere, and they dropped my contract, and I had completed 7 films and had about a total of 12 lines in the 7 films. So you can imagine how small the parts were. But I appeared in Blackboard Jungle, my first picture. I appeared in Forbidden Planet, which is a classic science fiction picture. I appeared in several other pictures. I think Love Me or Leave Me with James Cagney and Doris Day. And I played a choreographer in that, if you can believe that. I said, "Come on, girls, we'll go over this way, get on the side of the stage." That's an amazing line, but that was my line in Love Me or Leave Me. And basically began to learn how to do what we do in film. And I did an awful lot of voiceover and looping for them on other pictures that I wasn't involved in. But if you understand the looping process, there's a sound loop that will go around and usually put it up on the screen as well. And when you see the line go through it, that's when you say the line and try to match what the original line was as closely as possible. And that removes extraneous airplane noise and things like that were on the soundtrack that they didn't want. So they put the contract actors to work doing that, both at MGM and at Fox, where I was signed very shortly to another 7-year contract.
Oh, so you went from MGM to Fox and then Disney, correct?
I went from MGM to Fox to Disney to Goodson Todman, who had a contract on a show called The Rebel, and I was under contract to them for about 18 months, and they never could sell the pilot.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so that was several contracts I had, but the contract with Disney was really on an individual basis. I signed to do the jobs. I didn't really, it was like I had a contract because I worked there all the time, but I really didn't have a 7-year contract as I had at MGM and Fox. And Fox dropped me after 3 years. I was there 3 years. And I did 3 pictures. I did Elvis Presley's first picture, Love Me Tender, playing one of his older brothers. And I have the dubious distinction of being Elvis's older brother in his first picture and Pat Boone's older brother in his first picture, Bernadine. And so that, believe me, that's a dubious distinction. But I did those 2 pictures, and then I did a wonderful Western with Richard Woodmark called The Last Wagon. And I had such a great time with that. I had a great time at both contracts. When I was at MGM, my first picture was Blackboard Jungle, and I had a 2-word part. I said thank you and stepped out of the shot. I took a suitcase from a lady and said thank you and stepped out of the shot. I was a hospital orderly, and but I had rehearsed the whole cast, all those high school kids, including Vic Morrow and Sidney Poitier. I rehearsed with them because Glenn Ford couldn't rehearse with them. He was busy with another picture. So when he came down and found out that they were all rehearsed and knew the lines and everything, and he came and sought me out and thanked me and really talked to me at long length about being a motion picture actor, and could not have been better to me. And Richard Brooks, who was the director and a big, big director at that time, spent a lot of time with me talking about careers and acting and so forth. So I took a lot away from MGM with those relationships and conversations. And then when I started working with Woodmark, he took me under his wing and talked to me every night for hours and hours about how to attack a career and how to become an actor and films and so forth. And he was very helpful. And so I have some wonderful memories of those guys and what happened with them, and the honor of being in a picture with them.
Good.
And then, of course, I was under contract. I did 3 pictures at Disney, I believe. I did Pollyanna and a picture called 10 Who Dared, which was the story of the first party of men that went down through the Colorado River Rapids. The Powell Party in Lake Powell at Page, Arizona, is named after the leader of that expedition. He was an ex-Union Army officer who had lost an arm in the war, and we made a very good picture about that with Ben Johnson and Brian Keefe and L.Q. Jones, and a lot of guys were in that. It was really a wonderful show. And then I did Toby Tyler, and I shot a chimp out of a tree by accident. I thought it was something else, but I never should have shot that chimpanzee. I get complaints about that today, even today.
Really?
When people see Toby Tyler, say, you shouldn't have shot that chimpanzee, you know. He was a circus chimpanzee, and Toby Tyler was trying to find him. And I was just a hunter out in the woods with a rifle, and I saw something up in that tree and shot him. But I only winged him. I didn't kill him, and he recovered fully. So that's the story of that chimp.
Good.
But anyway, I went from there to the pilot. Andrew Fennedy was the producer of a show called The Rebel, if you remember that,
yes.
with Nick Adams. And I did a couple of Rebels, and then we made a pilot for a series called The Yank, which was a story of a Northern officer, again, in the Civil War, who had come to the South. And as Lincoln said in the second inaugural, we must bind up the nation's wounds. And most of the doctors in the South at the end of the Civil War were dead. Most of them had been killed in battle. Mm-hmm. So there were very few doctors. And I was a doctor. I had been an artillery officer, but I was a medical doctor before I became an artillery officer. And I came back to the South to follow Lincoln's advice and try to heal the sick and doctor all these people who had no medical help because the doctors had all been killed. So naturally, a Northern officer and a Yankee coming down to the South was not received very well by the Southerners, and I got into all kinds of trouble. But we made a lovely pilot, and I thought it was great, and everybody else did, but it didn't sell because that was the year that the networks decided to go from an hour to half-hour shows to hour shows. So we were a half-hour show, and we got lost in the shuffle. That didn't sell. Well, then I went to Columbia and Columbia Studios, Screen Gems, their television arm, and made a pilot for the Virginian, a half-hour black and white pilot for the Virginian, in which I had a chance to act with and get to know Jeanette Nolan, who later worked on the big Virginian show, as you remember,
right,
years later. And, of course, her husband was around, too, John McIntyre. He wasn't in the show, but I had a great time making that, and it was a completely different take on the Virginian. He was a fancy Southern gentleman with the boots on the outside of his pants and the dove gray riding breeches and a frilly shirt with frilly cuffs and a little bitty gun that he carried in a holster on his waist. It wasn't any longer than, I guess, 3 or 4 inches long. It was like a little one-barrel Derringer. And supposedly they were going to cut down on violence in Westerns, you know. So they give me a little gun. Well, the idea was to shoot everybody with that little gun, and I did. But because I had the scriptwriter on my side, but the whole thing was kind of precious and ridiculous, and it didn't sell. So for the same reason, they were going to hour shows. So if they had sold that pilot, I never would have had a chance to do the major Virginian project that I did at Universal. And I was all through with Disney's operation and through with everything, and I had just come off making the best picture I ever made, probably, Ride the High Country, with Randolph Scott and Joel McRae. And I played the lead villain, or heavy, in that picture, Billy Hammond, and confronted these guys and died in the gunfight at the end with those 2 old cowboys. And I had a wonderful time working with those guys, and they were very kind and very, very helpful. And very, 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 very quick to give praise and quick to help people in any way they could through that production. And of course, it showed because it all became a classic Western. And that was a Sam Peckinpah picture. And he was a wonderful director, as you remember. And this was before he had several aberrations and got lost in the vodka bottle. But he was it was a great and wonderful thrill to work for that man and see how he could move the camera and his vision for everything that happened. And later on, of course, in The Wild Bunch and other films that he showed his great genius in. But I just loved Sam, and we got along great. I never had any problem with him at all. So that was a damn good report, and I couldn't fault him in any way, shape, or form.